Good day, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Lead Empowered TV. I am Nathan Mitchell, and today we have a great guest joining us, Dr. Curtis Rasmussen. Kurt brings an expressive background to the table, 22 years of service in the U.S. Navy, where he retired as a Chief Petty Officer, rescue diver, and dive instructor, followed by his work as the Senior Industrial Organizational Psychologist for the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. He holds a PhD in Industrial Organizational Psychology and has spent his career helping leaders and organizations navigate the complex world of people, performance, and now artificial intelligence. In his free time, Kurt is an avid motorcycle rider, scuba diver, an AI enthusiast. He's even applied for a patent in the space. And Kurt is here today to share his insights on leadership, building incredible teams, and the impact of AI on human resources. Kurt, welcome to the show, my friend. How's your day so far?
It's doing great. Thanks, Nathan.
Great to
Great.
have you, man. I've been looking forward to this episode for a long time, and I've been diving into your book on AI and how it impacts the human resources space. And I'm excited to get more into this, as well as the work that you're doing with Focal Point. And you're here today to talk about leadership and teamwork and the impact of AI. And so much of that has changed and is constantly changing. But one of the things I really love about the work that you do, Kurt, is you talk a lot about helping leaders regain control of their time, their teams, their money, and ultimately their future. So let's start here today. From your perspective, which of those four tends to slip out of a leader's grasp first, and why? And what are some practical things that they can do to overcome that?
Well, thanks. Probably the number one thing is time, and I don't think anybody's really going to be too surprised about the time situation, especially if they've built a company, they're building an organization, and they're used to doing everything themselves. Then they tend to not want to relinquish control, and it's really being able to stand back and understand that you're in charge and that you hired hopefully great people. I mean, that's assumingly, that's what you wanted. You hired great people. Let them do what you hired them for. And then as you expand, your job changes and you got to give up the other jobs. You just can't do it all yourself. And then if you do try to do it all yourself, I mean, this is where you know, you're a micromanager, so the teamwork goes away. You're controlling, so you don't get that business deal as quickly because you had to see it and you were out of town or the email didn't get to you in a timely fashion. I mean, you have to stand back and start looking at your new position because you're growing too.
Yeah, so really what we're talking about here is, efficiency for one, right? And whether or not a leader maybe even perhaps trusts themselves to delegate to the team members that they've hired. And there's so many things to unpack there, right? Self-esteem is definitely a big driver of that. The higher we move up in organizations, things like imposter syndrome begin to creep in. Am I really as good as I think I am? Are people going to find me out? Are they going to find out that I don't really have all the answers and I don't know how to do this on some days? So what are some practical tips that you have for business owners that, maybe they don't trust themselves as much as they should, or maybe they're not hiring the quality of candidate as they should, maybe out of fear that, that individual is going to perhaps take their spot in the organization. That whole idea of, we really should be striving to hire people smarter than us, but it takes a special kind of person to really kind of set their ego aside and be willing to make moves like that. But the benefit for the business for the long term is extraordinary.
Oh, absolutely. So I think, the biggest thing you brought up there is the trust issue. And it's trust in yourself. So, you know, we have a lot of people, and this goes back to what you'd said, imposter syndrome. They're like, well, what if I'm found out? Well, if you're the president, the CEO, uh, who cares? That's not your job. Your job isn't to be a cybersecurity analyst. You hire cybersecurity analysts. Your job is to be the president, the CEO. It's you're in that decision making seat. And the other thing is, I'm not necessarily a big sports guy, but I can definitely picture, you know, a baseball team, and I don't know too many managers that can take the place of every player on the field. Just be like, well, you're not doing it well enough. I need to do it myself. It's like there's a reason why you're the manager. There's a reason why you're leading, because that's your job. You can do it very well. That's why you're there. Let the others do what they need to do too. Trust them, trust yourself, and trust them.
Yeah, and there's so much, you know, the first thing that comes to mind is as leaders focusing on what we do well and leveraging and delegating to people the tasks that don't come natural to us, right? That actually can do the task better than we can, and really knowing the team so well that you know what everybody's strengths and weaknesses are, including your own, and using that kind of collective strength of the team as a whole for the betterment of the business or the organization. But it, like we've talked about before, it kind of takes a special leader to do that. It has, a confident leader that knows that they've made the right decisions on the front end hiring, and know that the people that they trust to do the job are going to do it well.
No, absolutely, and this is kind of where I come in, right? As a business coach, as a industrial organizational psychologist, uh, I come in to go, hey, look, you know, why are you doing these things? Explain to me. Explain to me in your own words why you don't trust your employees to take care of these issues. Why do you feel that you have to be the decider? Because if your answer to me is, well, I got to make the decision because nobody's getting it right. Okay, well, who hired them? So if they're not getting it right, this comes back to you. Now, it doesn't mean that you did something terribly wrong. It just means that there was something in there that you shouldn't have considered you did. Maybe you're like the best person was frankly kind of intimidating to you because you're like, oh, they're going to take over my job. Well, if it's your business, let's take a step back. It's your business. Are they really going to take over your business? Uh, you're the one hiring them. You're the one interviewing them. Don't feel threatened by them. In fact, you should welcome them with open arms and say, "Hey, you're great. Now I can now things will improve beyond what I could do, and I'll go do my job. I'll go off and be the best CEO, president, owner I can be."
Yeah, so definitely in the small business world, that plays out a little bit differently than in a traditional corporate workplace where, people are getting hired and promoted, at all times. I can definitely see how that would be much more relevant, in that space where you're a mid-level manager, leader, et cetera, and you're more reluctant to bring in that individual that you see as being possibly more qualified than you. But on the small business side of things, the small business CEO, what I'm hearing from you, if they've assumed that role of chief everything officer, they are kind of responsible for that. It's their own doing. Am I hearing you right in that?
Absolutely, absolutely. The buck stops there.
Well, let's dig in a little bit to your work with Focal Point. I know that that's really rooted in helping business owners, build the kind of success that they are really, originally imagined for their
Mm.
business. I mean, you look at today's challenging landscape, especially with, AI reshaping how we work. Where do you see the biggest opportunity for leaders today and business owners to reclaim, that time freedom that so many want as a result of, getting into the small business sector?
The interesting thing is I don't necessarily see there's a new place to claim anything. I think it's the same place as we've always had. It's really getting that clarity. Because the thing is with artificial intelligence is if you're not already set up for success, you're just going to fail faster. So if you think that your people aren't efficient and AI is going to fix that, do you know why? Ask yourself why. Why are these people not efficient? What do I think they should do? What are my metrics? So, at that point, especially in the small business side of things, you really have to consider, you know, what it is my employee needs, because AI is not going to replace people, not easily. Plus that, and, we can hit on this, but it's not going to be that affordable. If you think it's affordable, it really depends what you're using it for. It's not necessarily an affordable solution to a lot of the issues that really go back to, again, clarity and trust. And that's where I come in. That's where the focal point materials come in, trust edge materials come in. They help show you, the questions to ask, the things you really need to consider, and look at your environment. And my background is an industrial organizational psychologist where I study the workplace. So I've studied the workplace for many, many years. So I'm not your average business coach where I'm coming from the corporate world and, hey, I did this. When I speak about these things, I speak about it based on the research. So it's not my opinion. It's not anecdotal. It's usually based on a lot of research, sometimes over 100 years.
I'm curious. One of the things that really stuck out to me that you just said is that, AI can actually help you or cause you to fail faster. I would like to unpack that a little bit because I think a lot of us look at AI and seeing AI as potentially having all the answers, right? Making us more efficient, more effective. So, how is it that AI actually helps us or causes us, I should say, to fail quicker? I mean, is it because we're asking the wrong questions? Are we using AI to try to find answers to the wrong questions or solutions, that kind of thing?
I mean, it's kind of a combination of everything. So, you know, AI has been sold as this genius product that comes in there and will solve your problems. Okay, what problem is it going to solve? Do you know what your problem is? So if you don't even know what your problem is, how are you going to solve it? Now, then you're placing, and let's go back just a little bit to, are you confident in your own ability to lead? If you're not confident, you're looking for these quick solutions. AI may be a quick solution, right? You're feeling it can come in. But if you don't want to even trust your employees, why are you going to trust, say, an outside vendor, because you probably don't have the resources, that they're going to have somebody that's writing the program, because at the end of the day, AI is a computer program, and they're going to get it right. They're going to mystically know what you don't, and they're going to solve it, which means they're going to take what they hear from you and they're going to interpret it themselves, and then they're going to solve what they think the problem is. So if you don't know what the problem is, now you're solving something at warp speed that may not even be a problem. It may just be a thing, and your real problem is something much deeper that you've never discovered.
One of the things that is always challenging for business owners or leaders is just it's really hard, right, to build an incredible team. And when I was in the corporate world, I felt at times that like hiring was a crapshoot. There were situations where everything looked good on paper, right? This was the right candidate, and I would hire them, and they just turned out to be terrible.
Mm.
And then you have the candidates that don't have all the qualifications, that don't look best on paper, and there was something, maybe a gut instinct that told me I should really hire this person and give them a chance. And some of those individuals turned out to be my best employees. And now we have AI. That's a part of that ecosystem that is helping us make those decisions. What is one practical way that leaders can blend human talent with AI tools to ultimately strengthen the workplace culture rather than dilute it? Because, truth be told, there's a lot of people that are frightened by the use of AI in organizations today.
Okay. Yeah, yeah. And let me start at the end, and then I'll go to the beginning. So at the end, there are currently two main reasons why people get laid off, get fired because of AI. The first is they're replaced. Now, are they truly replaced? That's a topic I'm happy to dive into at some other juncture. The second reason is it costs so much to implement the AI that they're trying to free up capital. Now, this has actually happened in large tech companies where they've laid off a couple thousand employees, and it's not necessarily because AI is replacing them, it's because they needed that capital freed up to use AI. Now, you mentioned that it's kind of a crapshoot, but you had this gut feeling. So, and this is kind of a rhetorical question back to you, is what attribute were you missing when you were actually doing a search for a candidate that it then came down to a gut? If you're not selecting people on the correct attributes, and a lot of us think, I know how to do that. Well, that's the thing with industrial organizational psychology, literally one of the first fields of psychology. We've been studying how to select people for work for over a century. Most people still do incredibly poor practices, and one of the key things is you have to understand what that person does for the job, what it takes to do that job. So, maybe it doesn't take a degree, maybe it doesn't take a certification, maybe it takes somebody who's enthusiastic and wants to learn. Then that's the attribute you should be selecting people on, not, oh, well, this person has, CISP or this certification, or they have a master's degree, and tell me, did some of the people, because you did mention that some of these people didn't look the most qualified on paper, but I mean, does that kind of ring true that, they're just people that were enthusiastic about their job and wanted to learn?
Yeah, for sure. And at the end of the day, I was with a Fortune 50 company at the time. And kind of the things that you're talking about is like job benchmarking, right? Where you really look at what are the qualities and characteristics that the job demands, right? And then creating an entire job benchmark and then really aligning the people that are coming through the front door with the standards that you say the job requires. And we didn't have anything like that.
And
Fortune 50 company.
and here's another thing, and somebody might feel picked on, but I'm not trying to pick on anybody.
Yeah.
So you got human resources. Human resources, you can get into human resources with a high school diploma. There isn't somebody with a high school diploma. There isn't a large group of people with high school diplomas that are going to do the same work that I do. Because I've just had more education. I know what to look at. I have an in-depth experience. But now you got these people that everything in your company starts and ends with HR. Everything starts and ends with HR. But you also have one of the most underfunded, underappreciated groups in an organization. And then on top of that, you're entrusting them with bringing on all these really quality people. It's like, if you don't know what to look for, why do you assume somebody that probably has less education than you do knows what to look for? And this is where I come in. I'm not in there to run your system. I'm in there to help build your system and get you a system that works and is legal and defensible and makes sense. And then we bring this back to the AI side of things. If you don't know these attributes that make somebody a good worker, how do you replace them with AI?
Yeah, that's a great point. It goes back to we have to make sure that we're asking the right questions in the first place, right? And, to ask better questions, we need better data.
You also need people that actually understand what they're looking at.
Yeah.
Again, this is, it. This is where I come in.
Yeah.
It's not that there's something I have that you couldn't learn or somebody else couldn't learn, it's that I've taken that time so you don't have to. So you bring somebody like me in to go, okay, you're wanting to get better hires, but you want to do this human machine teaming. All right, let's kind of pull this apart, and let's start talking about it, going down that road. Could you do that by yourself? You could, but now you have, I mean, that's why we have coaches on teams, right? On sports teams, because you get that outside look. You get, hey, you weren't quite doing this right, and it's to make everything work better. It's not to say that you can't do it yourself. It's
Yeah. So let's get back a little bit to your work with Focal Point. That whole idea we talked early on in our conversation about the chief everything officer. When somebody comes to you, a small business owner that's overwhelmed, they're working more hours than ever. As a small business owner, it's not uncommon. It's not 40 hours, right? It's usually
right.
60 to 70 hours or more. And yet they're not seeing better results. Just because we're efficient doesn't always mean that we're doing the right thing. So what is your first move to help them kind of reset the direction of their organization and get that clarity that they need to move forward with momentum?
One of the first things is really to figure out what is the purpose of their business, and not the surface level. Like, if you have a restaurant, it's to serve food to people. It's like, what is your real purpose to the restaurant? And even if you have a chain restaurant, there can be a real purpose. Like, I really enjoy, you know, seeing people that have had a good meal for a good value, right? I really like that. Okay. Now, them tracing that back and saying, okay, how's this tied into your business? Well, my business just does, this. And it's like, well, then why did you get into it? Well, I like this, but you're not doing that. So it's really kind of stepping back and kind of pruning that bush.
Curtis, we have just a few more minutes here, and I want to make sure I give you a couple minutes to talk about your book. You've written a concise guide on AI and its impact on HR. If you had just real quickly to boil it down, what's the most important mindset shift that leaders need to make as AI becomes a more central part of the hiring, training, and people development process?
I think there's a couple of key points. The first point is, if you don't understand your own system, if you don't know what questions to ask, AI is just going to help you get to failure sooner, and it can be very, very, very costly. I wrote an article about it recently, and the other part is, when it comes to data laws, we don't know how that is actually going to work out in practice, because some of them are very new, like the Virginia Consumer Data Protection Act. You could very well find yourself implementing AI and then be sued. I mean, it's happened. There's been EEOC claims against companies, and it's cost them hundreds of thousands of dollars because they've tried to make things more efficient. You really got to sit there and get that help to work through that whole system, and not necessarily vendor help. You want somebody that is more of a neutral player, especially with this much money outlay for a small business, even large businesses.
Well, Curtis, thank you so much for your time today. This has really been a valuable conversation, so relevant with AI. Thank you for sharing your insights and your perspective on leadership in today's AI-driven world. For those watching, if you want to learn more about Curtis's work with Focal Point or his guide on AI and HR, I have linked to both of those during the show today via QR codes. Once again, Curtis, thank you so much for being here, my friend. This has been an empowering conversation. Hope you have a great day.
Thanks, Nathan.